Well, as we've been walking through the Ten Commandments, and this week we are going to wrap up the Ten Commandments. Now, if you're sitting there and you're doing the math in your head, you're sitting there going, okay, we were on the 8th commandment last week, we've been doing one commandment a week, how are we going to wrap up this week? Because I'm pretty sure it doesn't go from 8 to 10, there's still one in between there somewhere. Be honest, we're going to kind of skip over the 9th commandment a little bit. What is the 9th commandment?
Do not lie.
Thou shalt not lie. That one, I'm going to be honest with you, it's pretty straightforward. You got to watch the words that come out of our mouths. But it's not just the words that come out of our mouth, it's our actions. We do not want our lives to lie about who we are. We don't want our lives to lie in the church, but when we go out into the world and our lives are not representing what they need to be, we're lying as well. We're hiding and we're lying to what we really are. But this week, as I was looking at it, I thought, I want to look at this 10th commandment. I wanted to hit this one before we got and going into Easter and everything that's going to be coming up over the next few weeks. And I hope and I pray that as we've gone through these commandments that you've seen something in a little bit of a different light than you have before. Or maybe you were just reminded of something that you had forgotten. But one way or the other, I hope that there's been something that you've been able to take out of it. I hope that you've been able to see that there's a greater picture than maybe we've seen before. Because so many times we take things just at face value, and we don't ever really dig any deeper into it. We talked about how fundamentally these commandments fall underneath two things. What are those two things? Anybody know what the two things are? We love God, love others. Love God, love others. Every commandment falls underneath one of those two commandments. When Christ said, love God, basically said, love God, love others, he was summing up the entire law in those two things. Because everything falls back to love God, love others. These things have to do with our relationship with God. They have to do with our relationship with each other. But even in those things that have to do with each other, it still affects our relationship with God. We've looked and seen how with every do, there is a do not. With every do not, there is a do. Sometimes we go, well, as long as I do this, I'm okay, but what are we supposed to not be doing at the same time? Or, well, as long as I don't do these bad things, I'm good, but what should we be doing in placement of those things?
Right.
So now we've come to the 10th commandment. And I've said this before as we've walked through these. I believe God that he gave these commandments in order for a reason. That they were given in the order that they were for a reason. I kind of feel like they kind of build on each other to a certain degree. What is the 10th commandment? Thou shalt not covet. Well, what does covet really mean? Because let's face it. In a world today, if you were to say, thou shalt not covet, most people, especially if you were to go, definitely probably 30 and below, definitely 20s and below are going to go, covet? What is covet? I don't have a clue what that word means. They don't have a clue. Vocabulary is not what it used to be. I used to spend a lot of my time as a youth pastor defining words. You go through scripture and they're just going, I don't have a clue what word you're talking about. Trying to even use even if it's not in scripture, theological words that we have, people just don't get. They don't understand those words anymore. We don't use them in everyday language. I'm going to just be honest with you, vocabulary as a whole is just not as extensive as what it used to be. There's those moments where I even would sit there and say a word, and I've been using it my whole life, and I would have teenagers look at me and go, okay, we don't have a clue what that word means. And I'm going, oh, really? Seriously? You don't have a clue what it means? Those are moments, and again, it's perspective, but all of a sudden I started realizing I'm not a teenager anymore. I wasn't using the terms and the words, apparently, that were as popular as what they used to be. But words change over time. And let's be honest, there's some words that we just also don't have substitutions for right now. We just don't. There's theological words that we just do not have an appropriate word to replace that encompasses the entire meaning of that word. It maybe gets a little portion and piece of it, but it doesn't encompass the entire meaning of that word. So I always strive really hard to make sure to try to dive into words, to try to figure out what some of those words mean. Because we do. We just sit there. And in fact, one time I even took with my teenagers, and I sat there and I said, we went through this, and it took us weeks to go through this. On the whiteboard, I asked them, I said, how many words do you hear in church on a regular basis that you don't have a clue what they mean? And I just started writing them up on a board. By the time we got done, it was unbelievable, the list of words that they don't understand. And the thing is there's also some of them that just an unchurched world is not going to understand. You start throwing out words like holiness, righteousness, covet, discern. There's some of those words that people just go, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. Teenagers, they were the first ones that go, righteousness, we keep hearing this word thrown out. We hear the pastor preach about it every Sunday, and the word keeps coming out of his mouth. Righteousness, righteousness. But what is righteousness? And so we took those words one by one. So what does the word covet mean? Like I said, we don't hear it a whole lot. Covet means to yearn, to possess, or to have. To desire in an unusually large degree. We can't just sit there and say it's the desire of something. No. It goes beyond just even a desire. Even if we look at the Hebrew word, we see the same thing. We go back and we look and we see what the original Hebrew word used for covet. And we see the same general idea for this root word. And it's to desire earnestly. To long after. Basically, that's what covet means. So, if we're not to desire or yearn for something, if we were just to give that definition out and say that we are not to yearn or to desire earnestly or in a large degree or yearn for something, if we just left it at that, I think we might be in trouble. Because we have to look at this further, because what if I yearn and desire earnestly for the heart of Jesus? To have Christ living in me. Is that not good and true to have that same yearning and desire to have Christ? To be like Him? Is that not a good thing? So where's the line? Where do we run into this? Because we should want to yearn, to possess, to have Christ-like characteristics. You see, we also have to look in Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 21. This passage is parallel. This commandment is paralleled in Deuteronomy 5:21. It basically broadens it a little bit, but it says, you must not covet your neighbor's wife. You must not covet your neighbor's house or land, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. You see, this commandment is specifically talking about the desires of the flesh, the desires of the world. So it should be to yearn, to possess, or to have, to desire, in an unusually large degree, things of the world. So, as we walk through this, I want to take this even a little bit further. Let's walk through it, and we have to kind of build and work through this journey as we go through it. You see, some also believe that the verb covet includes actions as well as emotions. And I think there's an aspect there, because we have to remember, it's not just a feeling that I have for it, that maybe there's some actions that are included in it as well. You see, it's not just our thoughts and desires of the heart. What one thinks and feels, and not just simply what one does, has moral consequences. So many times we get hung up on the actual physical do or do not. Well, as long as I don't actually physically go out and it drives me to physically do something, I'm okay. That's not what covet means. It doesn't mean that I shouldn't desire something so badly that I go out and do something about it. It means we don't even need to feel that way about something to that degree. And I'll be honest, I think perhaps the reason why this commandment is placed last is because it's the most, comprehensive of all the commandments. And it includes what is absent from the rest of the commandments. Now we can try to add that into the rest of the commandments, and we've kind of hit on it and talked about it off and on throughout the commandments. But I think this one specifically addresses the issue right off. See, maybe if we figure out the keys to this commandment, we figure out and connect with some of the previous commandments in a new way. You see, this commandment strikes at the very heart of the matter. Literally, the heart. This one has to do 100% with the heart. We can sit there and say, well, thou shalt not murder. Well, you can fundamentally go back and you can sit there and look and say, you're not supposed to hate somebody, and you're not supposed to do this, or you're not supposed to do that. But still, there's still the actual physical act of killing somebody. And we can, like I said, we unravel it, we unpack it, we can try to come to this conclusion. This one hits it straight out of the gate. It's right there. It is 100% about your heart. The rest of these they all include the heart. But that's not the very core, per se, of that commandment. You see, killing, adultery, stealing, lying, all those things are the result of the wrong desires of someone's heart. They coveted something, they earnestly desired something to the point that they violated one of these actions. Matthew 15, verse 19, from the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, all sexual immorality, theft, lying, and slander. That is the source of all those evils, is the heart. You want to eliminate all those things, where do you go? The heart. This commandment shows that none of the previous 9 commandments can be observed merely from an external, and when I say external, I'm talking about our actions, or from a formal act. We cannot properly deal with any of the other 9 that we've talked about. This commandment, it shows us that we cannot properly deal with those if we do not address the internal. See, they all start within the heart. Let's think about this one for a second. If you can eliminate the internal issue, what's going on inside here, you're going to get the external, right? If you deal with someone's heart, you're going to take care of murder, lying, adultery, slander, theft. You go on and on and on the list. If you get their heart, you get all those other things. But the external does not solve the internal. If we can make somebody quit stealing, quit lying, quit killing, we can make them quit those things, there's still an issue at the heart. And the facts are, we all know, is it really going to completely heal them? Is it really going to solve the problem? No. Because what we're going to do is we're going to move on to something else. Well, I'm going to kill one person, and I'm never going to kill another person. Well, Well, if we don't address the issue of why that person killed somebody, they're going to find another outlet for the evils in their heart. You're going to. Because everybody, we all know if going through psychology classes and going through different things, and if anybody's ever gone to a psychologist, gone to a counselor, ever known anybody that ever has, there's a little thing that we like to call coping. How you cope with things. How you deal with things. Well, I'm upset and I'm angry about these things. Well, there's a way you're going to learn how to cope with those things. We're going to do it one way or the other. But there's healthy ways to do it, and there's unhealthy ways to do it. There are godly ways to do it, and there are ungodly ways to do it. Is it ungodly to get angry? No. Anger is an emotion, and God gave us emotions. Anger itself is not evil, but there is a godly way to deal with anger, and there is an ungodly way to deal with anger. Just like I believe, if we look at this coveting one, I think there's nothing, God gave us this emotion. You think about coveting, it kind of comes down to an emotion. Why do we have that emotion? And I think it goes back to just what we said a second ago. There's that desire, that we need to have that desire in us to want the things of Christ in us. There has to be that desire to want those things. If you just try to eliminate the desires to earnestly those things, you look at that definition of covenant, if you eliminated some of those things, it would eliminate wanting the spiritual things as well as the worldly things. God gave us that emotion for a reason. It's how we cope and how we deal with that emotion that's the problem. We need to be coping and dealing with these things. But you also find out that if you deal with somebody that's coping with things in a very unhealthy way, if you just force them to quit doing whatever they're doing to cope with things, let's say someone is overeating because they're trying to cope with something. If you can force them to quit overeating without addressing the reason why they're overeating, they're going to find something else in their life. They're going to replace it with something else. You got to go to the heart of the matter. You got to go to the heart of what caused that in the first place. It all comes back to the heart. You see, I think that as we look at this, we've allowed sometimes the wrong theology of this commandment to misinform us for many years. And I think even the Pharisees allowed their thinking to be wrong. Well, we knew their thinking was wrong, and it had been twisted. I believe, just like we do so many in this world today, that we believe if we focus on the things we do, that will fix the problem. But we all know that it's not the things that it's the problem, it's the heart that led up to them. But we even in the church have a bad tendency to get sometimes focused on how people are coping with the evil desires in their heart instead of their hearts themselves. The church has had a tendency to do that in the past. There's a little word that we use for that, and that's called legalism. We get focused on the things and not the heart. You see, you think about it, if we scream at people or we yell at people to do certain things, we sit there and say, well, you need to stop getting drunk all the time, because that's just a sin and that's evil, and that's all we do is just scream at them, telling them to quit drinking. Are we fixing and helping heal anything? No. Now, it's God that's going to fundamentally heal them. It's God that's going to help them in those situations. But we have if we just scream that at them, they're going to sit there and they're going to just look at it, and they're going to look at us and just kind of whatever and go on their way. Or maybe we do actually get them to quit drinking, but if we're not dealing with the issue, they find something else to replace it. Same thing. We can sit here every Sunday. We could stand up here when we take our offering right here. We could stand here and just be like, you need to give your money. You need to give your money now. That's what God tells us. That's what the commandment says. You got to give your 10%. And you know what? We want 10%. And then we're going to auto-enroll you on auto draft so we make sure to be guaranteed to get your 10%. That's not what this is about. We could do that. We could do that all day long. We could sit there and browbeat people to give their 10%. But it's a heart issue. That's a reflection of something else that's going on inside of here. And I know that if they're giving their 10% and I'm not having to browbeat them, I know there's something right inside here. I know that God has done a work inside their life to where they're able to do that. And I don't ever know what's going on inside here. There's different situations, different circumstances. We talked about this yesterday in our men's prayer breakfast. We had a bad tendency in the church to use scare tactics for many years. Scare the stuff out of people. And in some instances, maybe it worked. In a lot of instances, it did not work. You see, some things, even you can sit there and say, tithing, that's a good thing. That's good. It's right. But let's face it, that's not what saves us. That's not what makes us a disciple of Christ. Makes us a child of God. That's not what does it. These are symptoms or indicators of something going on in the heart. They'll tell you when you go through some of these Bible classes and you're going through things, and one of them was a discipleship class or a spiritual development class, and they're talking about leading your church through discipleship. And they ask you the question, how can you tell if your church is spiritually growing? How can you tell if your church is spiritually growing? You don't know what's going inside here. You don't know what's going on in here. It's by the actions. It's by the byproducts. Is tithing increasing? Is participation increasing? Are we gaining new people? Is evangelism happening? What's happening in people's lives? What are people quit doing? What are they starting to do? Those are all indicators of what's going on inside the heart. And I think this is amazing because we're right back to where we started at before we started the Ten Commandments. Remember what we said before we started, we'll go through the Ten Commandments? It's not the law that saves you, it's what? It's grace that saves you. It's love that saves you. It's God's unconditional, unmerited love that saves us. It's not the law, it's not our actions that save us. I feel like what we're seeing here is within these very own Ten Commandments, we're seeing this emphasis come back. And I think the Pharisees missed it. I think this is one of the commandments that the Pharisees missed that made them become so legalistic in the first place. Because they got so caught up on the actions of what you are to do and not do that they missed the heart of the matter. Yes, there's a place for the law. The law can help us see, and the law helps us see that we need grace. But it can never substitute grace. Romans 7, verse 7. Well then, am I suggesting that the law of God is sinful? Of course not. In fact, it was the law that showed me my sin. I would never have known that coveting is wrong if the law had not said, you must not covet. Those were the words of Paul. He summed it up right there. The law did not save him. The law was not bad. The law helped show him that there was something wrong. There was something wrong inside here. You see, we need to get people connected with God and allow God to cleanse them internally. You think about it. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6 says, yet true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. True godliness with contentment. You see, when we find God, when we seek God, He's going to give us that contentment. When we yearn for Him, He gives us contentment for the things of the world. For the wealth, for the things, the possessions, for these worldly things, He quenches that thirst that our sinful natural self has. When we seek Him, when we seek Christ above all else, we find true contentment. You see, let's face it, many people are innocent of wrongdoing on the basis of outward acts. There's many people in this world that have never, if you look at just outward acts, have never violated one of those commandments. But they nevertheless are condemned when you start looking at inward acts and thoughts. They're not right with God. They're not focusing on what they're supposed to. And they themselves are condemned, even though they may not have physically violated one of these commandments. You know, you may act great, but your heart's a mess. Because let's face it, holiness is not about our actions. And I'm going to tell you, I've said this before, I struggled with that in my younger years. I struggled with that holiness was about actions. Because that's kind of how I heard it presented to me my entire childhood. Was holiness was about my actions. You shouldn't be doing this, you should be living a holy life. And so I got them too mixed up. I heard people dwelling more on the actions than on my heart and my relationship with God. And so I began to think that holiness was about our actions. I believe that God could give me the strength to quit doing those things. But I believe that it was all about my actions. It's about our hearts. Holiness is all about our hearts. It's about our will. It's about giving God our hearts. It's about giving God our wills. And when we give Him our hearts, when we give Him our will, when we become obedient to Him, the actions take care of themselves. That is the external indicator that someone is living a holy, sanctified life. That's not what this. That itself does not make them a holy, sanctified person. You see, these evil desires need to be purged by the Spirit of God. It is only then that one can live in perfect obedience of God's love. I found this little list right here, and it says, this is the process. It begins with God's grace at work in us. God's love at work in us. And then we accept God's grace. We accept God's love. And then God's grace at work in us again while we try to follow the law in perfect obedience. Through God's strength, through God's power, but it's God's grace at work. And then it's the acceptance of God's total cleansing of our hearts. And then we live in perfect obedience. Is when we follow that process. And some of us, and everybody here, and everybody we will ever run into is going to be somewhere along that process. It is not live in perfect obedience and then accept God's grace. It's not accept God's grace and then God's grace is at work in us. It's God's grace is at work in us. We accept His grace. Then His grace is at work in us again. And then we accept it again. There's a process that we have to follow through. So as we wrap up these 10 commandments, and I think it's just one of those things, we have to stop, and this is one of those reflection moments. Where in that process are we at? Where in the process are we? Are we at step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in between 2 and 3, in between 4 and 5? Where are we at? Where have we stopped at? Because sometimes we get stalled out and we just lose our momentum. And, we've accepted God's grace and God is at work in us, but maybe we need to take things a step further. And we need to accept God's total cleansing of our hearts. That way we can live in that perfect obedience. We can live out those 10 commandments. This is something that only you can answer. This is only something, this is between you and God. This isn't, again, this is one of those things, I can't tell you where you're at. I can't tell you what struggle you're dealing with. I can't tell you why you're hung up between 3 and 4, between 4 and 5. I don't know. That's between you and God. Now, we can work through it. We can figure it out. But first and foremost, you need to be bringing yourself and figuring out, where am I at on that list? And then you need to be bringing that to God. And you need to be saying, God, I want to get to the next step. God, I want to experience that final. I want to live in perfect obedience. I want to experience that ultimate satisfaction. I want to experience that ultimate contentment that Timothy was talking about. So as we wrap up this morning, as we close up, this is just another one of those moments that's between you and God. We're just going to take just a second here. We're going to sing through here in a minute. But I think it's a good thing for us to just stop and question, stop and look and go, where am I at? Am I coping with things in an unhealthy way? Am I coping with the evil desires of my heart in an unhealthy way? And the only way you're going to cope with them in a healthy way is for God to come in and help eliminate those evil desires in the first place. It's the only way that you can do it. Maybe it's not you. Maybe it's somebody you know. You don't know what step they're at, but you just know they're not at that final step yet. You know they're not living in perfect obedience. And you want to see them at that final step. What we talked about earlier, we can talk about it all day long, but where does it begin? In prayer. We need to be praying for those individuals. We need to be praying for and interceding in their lives to help get them to that point. So as we prepare here in just a moment, we're gonna sing through. Just open yourself up for examination this morning. Open yourself up for God's voice in your life here this morning.
It is well.
church is to make it to where every individual in this world can sing that song. To be able to sing, "It is well with my soul." And our job's not done until every individual can sing that song as joyfully at the top of their lungs as what they can. Dear Heavenly Father, we just come before you this morning. And Lord, I don't know where everybody is at. I don't know where each and every one of us is at in this process. I don't know how we're coping with things. Whether they're good or whether they're bad, Lord, that's between you and them. But Lord, I know what my job is. I know what my job is as a fellow believer. It's to be in my knees in prayer, praying for those individuals, but also living and leading by example. So Lord, as we leave this place, as we prepare to go out into this world, Lord, give us the strength that we need to work this process, to stay in this process with you, to allow your grace to do a work in our life. But Lord, it doesn't stop here, it doesn't end here. May we take that same grace, may it work through us, may it pour through us into the lives of others, so that we may be able to bring more into your family, more into this group, that we may all sing at the top of our voices, "It is well with my soul." That is our job. That is what we are to do, Lord. And I can only imagine the triumphant singing and the rejoicing that goes on in heaven as every individual is able to sing, "It is well with my soul." Lord, may you do a work in our lives and in the works of the lives of those others. May we remember to spend our time in prayer. Not to get hung up on just the actions and all these things, but to stay focused on the heart of the matter. And to be praying for the hearts of others as well as our own heart. Because Lord, we cannot lead others where we ourselves have not been. Lord, we thank you for the work that you've done in us and inside this church and the lives of so many that we know, but the work is not done. And Lord, we look forward to the days ahead as we see your grace and mercy and we see this process worked out in the lives of so many within this city, within these 2 miles around us, Lord. Lord, we thank you. We love you. Lord, we go out as representatives for you here this morning, both leading and living and praying by example. Lord, thank you. In your powerful name, amen. You are dismissed.